So the first thing to understand about the VC industry is that they're very conservative in not messing up their customers. So they're not going to invest money unless there's an urgency to invest it. They're going to take their time. And the second is they're going to be very, very concerned with the time your investment gives them their money back or the total value. Well, when you think about the total value, you have to say to yourself, now I understand why they kill companies. Why does a VC kill company? They invested in you. They love you. You're awesome. And by the way, as they said in Monty Python, I'm only mostly dead. I'm not dead yet. I'm only mostly dead. They have to kill you because if they don't, a middling company in venture capital, I've been in 2 venture capital companies, doesn't mean I don't love the entrepreneur.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur Podcast, filled with marketing and leadership tips on launching and growing your business with your host, Deanne Mora.
Today on the podcast, I have the pleasure of welcoming Blair LaCourte. Blair has spent time in the C-suite of the largest companies in live entertainment, private aviation, private equity, and tech. He's taken several companies from startup to IPO. He's won multiple awards, including Top 100 Most Influential Leaders in Transportation and Automotive, a Green Beret Certificate of Appreciation, NASA Innovator of the Year, and Advertising Age's Top 10 Business Marketers. Now, if all that wasn't enough, Blair is currently an astronaut-in-training for Virgin Galactic, where he hopes to fly sometime this year. He's currently vice chairman of the Buck Institute, the world's leading research organization on longevity and aging, as well as co-founder and facilitator of a global mastermind group of CEOs. Blair, I'm excited to welcome you to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. After listening to that list that doesn't seem to have any through line to it, I'm exhausted. I'm thinking, wow, what did I do? What did I do with my life? What happened?
I know, you've been just sitting around doing nothing. Clearly an overachiever, and hopefully I didn't steal all of your thunder with that introduction, but I'd love to start with your backstory. What brought you along that very journey to where you are today?
Sure. And, I have actually in the last few years, especially with the mastermind group and coaching, I had a bunch of time to try to think about, really what is the through line. And I also, as we've talked about before, I have 3 sons that are 20, 23, and almost 26. And I'm trying to figure out what to tell them, right? Like about what you're going to do with your life. And so I've come to the conclusion that, it really all started, I think, with the fact that both of my parents were entrepreneurs. And that I absolutely hated entrepreneurship because it caused a lot of stress. It caused a lot of friction. You eat what you kill. The end of the month, are we going to pay our rent or not pay our rent? It felt very unstable, especially for maybe the oldest male in the family who had the perception that he was supposed to be taking care of everybody. But it turns out that a lot of times the trauma you see early in life, gives you a clue to what you're going to end up being drawn towards. And so while I have really not been an entrepreneur, I mean, a lot of people talk about entrepreneurship. I define an entrepreneur as someone who's started a company on a credit card, had an idea that they believed in so much that it made them sick not to do this idea and actually made it happen, right? So if you look at the statistics for entrepreneurship in the United States, that includes, whatever kind of business, not just tech. It's 1 person in a million starts something from zero and gets it to $10 million for 5 years in revenue. So I am not an entrepreneur because I've never really taken that risk. I am fairly entrepreneurial, and I think it has to do with the fact that I learned how to bond with entrepreneurs and see what they were doing. And my job was to try to figure out how to be entrepreneurial enough to transition them from the idea to a business that, was replicable. And so I think if you looked at my career, you could look at each thing I did and said, oh, that's exactly what he did. It was either a recap because they were in trouble and you needed to fix it, or it was a growth company where it was growing so fast they didn't know what to do and you had to fix it, right? And in both of those cases, it's really all about being humble enough to really listen to entrepreneurs. Because you could, if you don't understand how they got there, it's very, very difficult to meet them where they are and take them to the next level.
Absolutely. Well, and it sounds like you've had an opportunity to work with over 1,000 companies during your career, including in private equity. So you've seen a lot. I'm sure you've seen some patterns emerge. And we're in, as everyone knows, somewhat of a challenging economic time right now. And I know one of the areas that you've worked in is private equity. So tell me a little bit about how you would characterize the state of VC funding right now, and how should entrepreneurs seeking funding proceed?
Sure. And again, maybe I'm getting old, so I always step back when I talk about this. Let me step back first to say the biggest aha when I went into academics and tried to teach, and when I went into investing, because I was an operator and went into investing, is you have to take a deep breath and understand what the industry really is. When I looked at VCs, I would think VCs are the people who tell me whether I'm doing well enough that I deserve money, right? And when I get that money, I am going to feel great. And this is going to be my rocket ship because they know they have, given me that money because they know that I'm going to be one of the ones. And we have to realize about whether it's venture capital or it's private equity or some other type of investing, they have their own business, their own industry, and their own business model. So when you ask me what's the state of the venture capital industry today, it's an industry that's in a cycle where there's a lot of ambiguity. So there tends to you'll hear this over and over again from friends who are trying to raise money. Very difficult to get people over the hump. Not because they're not smart enough and not because they don't understand what you're doing, but they're trying to figure out how not to actually invest in something at this moment that's either going to overextend them or that they can't see where the ambiguity is going to lead. Because if you're a VC, the way you get your money back to your investors, and by the way, this is going to sound very simple, they don't work for you. They work for the people that give them money. That is their customer. You happen to be someone that they're partnering with and that they're giving money that you need to do something for them. You are a vendor. You're a vendor. If you do what they tell you to do, they'll be able to either get a PE firm to buy it, or they'll be able to take it public and the public markets will buy it and they will give their customers back what they want. And those customers will then give them more money. So what happens when you're a vendor and you don't do what your customer wants you to do? You become misaligned. Okay. So whether you're misaligned because it's not your fault and the markets went one way, or you're misaligned because you made a mistake, a VC cannot differentiate. Because as far as their customer is concerned, whether it was your fault, it was the company's fault or not, they never would be with that company if it wasn't for the VC. So what I would say is VCs are your customers. So understand how their business works. They have to get their money back and they have to get it back within 5 to 7 years because they want to keep raising funds because that's the way they get bigger. So if you take 10 years, that is very, very bad. There's a term that you hear all the time and you think about it as just a financial term called IRR. Internal rate of return is how they get rated to their customers. So they get more customers when they have a higher IRR. So if you take 10 years to get liquid, even if you're more valuable than you would have been, that is actually very bad for them. So the first thing to understand about the VC industry is that they're very conservative in not messing up their customers. So they're not going to invest money unless there's an urgency to invest it. They're going to take their time. And the second is they're going to be very, very concerned with the time your investment gives them their money back or the total value. Well, when you think about the total value, you have to say to yourself, now I understand why they kill companies. Why does a VC kill a company? They invested in you. They love you. You're awesome. And by the way, as they said, Monty Python, I'm only mostly dead. I'm not dead yet. I'm only mostly dead. They have to kill you because if they don't, a middling company in venture capital, I've been in 2 venture capital companies, doesn't mean I don't love the entrepreneur. But just like if an animal is crippled and will never recover, you need to kill it so that doesn't stay in pain. And so I'm using these graphic, dramatic things because I want to shake some people out of having the wrong impression. They're not mean people. They're just saying the chances a middling company, which means you lost your momentum, will recover and recover fast enough without them having to give you more money that they'll get a good IRR is about 1%. So they have to let those companies die so that they can focus their time and energy and any money they have left on the ones in the top 50% who will actually have a chance to give you more money. So if I did one thing on this podcast, I hope that I just demystified this with you that I love VCs. I have been a VC. I love the people in venture capital. And the time you will not like a VC is when you don't understand what they do. And when you're misaligned, you're surprised. So if you're going to take money from the day you take money from an institutional investor, that means someone who took money from someone else. From the second you take that, a clock starts ticking. Now they can love you and hug you, but the clock is now ticking to you have to perform. So yes, it is a compliment. They have picked you because they think you're good, but they've also picked you because you have convinced them that you will be good on the time frame and the return ratio that makes them successful. And the second you're not look like you're going to do that, then you have a problem, and then you will be misaligned with them. So the last thing I would say is there's always this rule of thumb: you don't pick the firm, you pick the partner. Now we always want to pick the firm because it's the brand. Why is that true? Well, it's true for two reasons, which relate back to what I just told you. One is if you pick the right partner and you build enough of a relationship, they're going to be honest with you, like I'm being honest with you, and you're going to understand when you're starting to become misaligned early, not late. The second is if they really can see it coming and they're smart and they care about you, they will try to intervene before you start to middle. Because when they go to their partner meeting at that which they go to, every Monday morning and a big one every month, they will go through a list of every investment and they will decide who is on the red list. And once you end up on the red list, they're saying we're worried about this. It's very, very difficult to recover from that. So when you pick your partner, you have that discussion with them, and you also have them answer the top 3 questions that you need to know about the fund as well. Are you early in the fund or are you late in the fund? Because if they're early in the fund, you have a lot more time to recover. If they're late in the fund, they have no more reserves and they'll kill you faster, right? The second question you have to ask is how big is the fund? And when are you raising your next fund? How big the fund is will tell you how much money they can put into each company because you can never put in more than 10%. So don't assume they're going to be able to put in more money. And the most important question that almost no one asks is who have you actually co-invested in a round at the next round? Because your whole point with an investor is that those investors invest at certain stages, whether that's seed or A or B or C, they invest. And they may invest in 2 of them, but very, very rarely can they invest through the lifespan because the investors they took their money from don't want the risk return other than the risk return of where they put their money in. So when you ask your VC, who have you invested in, what you're doing is asking them the most important question. Because from the first time they put the money in, yes, they can help you. But in reality, the biggest help you need is to get your next round at a higher valuation, which means they have to have relationships with people who put bigger checks in. Right. So that's what that's my advice I would give my kids or anybody who came to me.
Well, you raised some really great points that not everyone thinks about. It seems like it's more the dream, right? I mean, if you go, today you'd walk into any incubator in the country and, everybody is working really hard. They're practicing their pitches and it's all about, I'm going to get funded. I'm going to get funded. Some of them are really early though, and they may end up having multiple costly pivots, which it sounds like from what you're saying, that could actually end up killing your business in the long run. If you seek funding too early, that it might not lead to the result that
So let's put a term to what you just said, because I think you're exactly right. Never take money until it absolutely hurts, right? Because that's why you want to bootstrap, because you know that you're not getting enough funding and you do more. But at the second you take money, understand you better be in the time frame. The clock will start ticking. Are you within 3 years of being able to scale with that money? And if you are, it's not bad to take the money. But if you don't know what you're going to do, or you think you've got a couple more pivots, just be careful not to actually take too much money too soon.
Yeah. Well, and also, suddenly now you're really working for someone else. Whereas, you may have either turned your side hustle into something, or you decided to launch something with that entrepreneurial mindset that I want to go do my own thing. And now suddenly you have somebody else to answer to. So it's not to say that it's necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely something to
Yeah,
consider.
and I want to put a point on that. And I used the term very specifically, and people will bristle. You're a vendor. You just sold yourself to someone. It's not that they're a bad person, and it's not that you're working for the man or working for the woman. You just sold them a product. You told them that if they give you this money, this is what you're going to do. You're going to give them this IRR in this time frame. If you do not give them what you promised them, then you will be misaligned, and then you will feel like you're working for someone because they have an issue with you. The issue is you didn't do what you were going to say you did. Now, I get it. Every entrepreneur is going to go, no, no, no. Everyone else is doing worse than me. And no, 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 no. I pivoted as soon as I could. And how could it's not my fault? And this happened over there. They will not care because you took their money. Now, this is really being raw about it. And I'm not saying they're not human beings and that they don't want you to succeed. But if you don't actually look at the base only comes into play when something goes wrong. The contract only comes into play when your relationship is frayed. Okay. But that happens a lot when someone's giving you money and you're not giving them their money back when they want it. Okay. So, the other big thing that people ask is they go, oh my God, I got a VC funding from this VC and I got this valuation. I am so good. I got $100 million valuation. I got a 10 million. I got a $50 million valuation. We used to, I wouldn't say laugh at that. We used to have to take a deep breath because every time someone came in and was worried about the valuation, we knew that they were not an experienced operator and that we were going to have to coach them because valuation means nothing. Because if you tell me you want this valuation and I really want to do business with you, I can give you that valuation, but I'm going to change the structure of the deal. Okay. And I'm going to make that risk reward turn back to what I need it to be to get that valuation, which means I have to be more restrictive. So when you hear the word preferred stock, it doesn't mean you're preferred. It means that they are taking preference over you, which means that what I always tell when people come, let's just take a look at the terms. What's your liquidation preference? Okay. When they sell, if we have to sell this company very quickly, will they get all their money back and then participate? Will they get double their money back? Right? What negative controls do they have? Because the higher the valuation, the more they're going to want negative controls. Are there board controls? Are there controls on budgeting? Are there controls on when you can sell and when you can't sell? Are there controls on who you can take money for in the next rounds? So none of those things are terrible things, but that is a reaction from an investor who has who their customer, their investor is saying to them, I need this risk return. So if you're going to pay a lot for something, make sure that you put a bunch of caveats into it. Now, if you're not going to pay a lot for something, maybe it will be what they'll call a plain vanilla offer, and you'll have a lot more freedom. Again, they're not concepts that anyone can't understand. I think they're just concepts that people don't think about because we get so excited that someone loves us and that thinks we're worth something and we're beautiful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, one of the things that obviously will lead a business to success is strong leadership. And I know when we were prepping for the podcast, we talked about some of the parallels between military experience as it relates to business strategy, which I found interesting. Could you provide some of those insights to our listeners?
Sure. I mean, I think that businesses are just a sport. And what is a sport? It's a game, right? And what's the game? The game is one of strategy and execution. And unfortunately, when you boil down what a military operation is like, it's unfortunately a very serious sport with very serious consequences and maybe a little bit less on the rule side, depending on it. But there are a lot of things you can learn from how the military deals with strategy in high risk and high ambiguity situations and how the military deals with things when it's steady state. So I'll give you a couple of examples of things that have migrated from the military into the business world. One is chiefs of staff,
Mm.
right? It's now a term that you actually hear. You only 20 years ago, no one outside the military would know what it is. What is it? It's a person who is talented enough. It's not an EA. An EA is a partner, I believe, that is very complementary to the executive they work with. Okay. And in the military, you will have a different form of an EA, that person that makes it okay and does the things that they do better, right? A chief of staff looks a lot like a CEO. It's basically someone who can protect, prioritize, and when needed, actually go out and take some of the tasks off the table and then report back in, right? So that's a thing that we found can make a CEO much, much more efficient when you have someone there that may not be at your level, but that is training to do the things that you're doing and will take it that for your level. The other is, how do you deal with when environments change? So when you look at investments, steady state investments need different leadership, clearly, than when there's a lot of volatility in the market. Now, you can say, wow, well, I just want to pick a good market that's got steady growth. And there are some benefits to that because you understand the value chain, you understand the value proposition, you understand the customers, you understand the competitors, and you can be a fast follower and you can be better. But it's also very hard to dislodge someone in a steady state business because they're ahead of you and they have money, and then they can confuse things, and it's tough. But you can shake them up. If you look at times with high volatility, that's when you can shake things up and make a lot of money, because then the leaders are in trouble, because it's like having tanks when everything is on hilly, and like in Afghanistan versus Iraq where it was all flat. It's all hills and it's all caves and it's all um, hiking for 2 days. Now all of a sudden tanks aren't as useful, right? So the mechanisms that a company that's in a steady state would have in place are going to be very difficult because they're going to have to change. And they have what Chris Christensen would call the innovator's dilemma. That kind of change is highly stressful because you're thinking, if I make that change too soon, I will destroy whatever advantage I have on flat ground if I start to get rid of my tanks and start adding in. Whereas someone who's coming to the fight with no heavy armor is thinking, I'm going to actually organize and fight like a guerrilla force, similar to what happened during the Revolutionary War. Took a while for them to understand that lining up and taking a very precise shot with 15 people could be broken by having a bunch of people run around and shoot from different angles, right? So think of military strategy as maybe testing grounds. You can think of things that you've seen before when you study military history, and you can figure out how to try this. So for instance, sending out a trial balloon and testing to see what happens. That's there's a lot of military history around that, and I often when I have a CEO that has a difficulty with change, I often ask them to go back and read some essays on how you decide to change. Now, one of the things that I co-authored was a thing for the Defense College called SAFE, right? Which is when you're in the battle and you're cut off from communication, what do you tell your commanders to do? Okay, you can't see what's happening on the whole field, but you can see what's happening in your part of the theater. You need to stabilize. The first thing is to know where you are, because when things change quickly, you have to actually understand, are you on your feet? Are you kneeling down? Or do you have supplies? Where are you at this given moment of time? The second is, once you're stable, you can take a deep breath and try to analyze what you should do next. Then you can focus again, and then you can execute. But many, many times, people start. There's a SEAL team saying that says, shoot, move, and communicate, which means the way and the way to continue to advance in a situation is, I'm first going to shoot, which is going to change the dynamic. Then I'm going to move, and then I'm going to communicate. But if you're a leader, I would argue that you need to communicate, then move, and then shoot, right? Because those guys are looking for someone to tell them where to move to, right? And so, it's not bad to have executors, but it's bad to continue to execute and use all your ammunition when it's suboptimal.
Yeah.
So that may have, for somebody out there that may have gotten too much of the into the military jargon, but I would say that for a regular business person, remember, brainstorming is about, fun and possibility and hope. Strategy is about saying no. Strategy is about saying no, which means you better stop for a second, stabilize and analyze and decide what you're going to say no to. Strategy isn't about saying yes. It isn't about going after a new market. That's brainstorming. Strategy is deciding which market and when and how to actually put all the wood behind, one arrow. And then when you take a look at what makes businesses work and what makes military organizations succeed, everything is a business model because the business model touches the customer. I get it, it's cliche, but cliches are out there for a reason. Either you're selling or you're supporting selling. That's it. That's all businesses do. They get a customer to actually say, I need that, and we provide them value and they compensate us for that. So when you look at a business model, it has to do with how you engage and you provide value and are compensated for that value. Now, in some cases, I just talked to a company the other day. There's a company that came out into a new market and they built this huge database of people and they're helping to place those people. So they're doing a very, very different end run on the recruiting business. Um, and they're using AI, and it's a tool. AI is a tool. Now, when you look at your strategy for that, if they've already got a massive database and you need to catch up with them, and they're already going to a bunch of companies and saying, I have the biggest database and I can give it to you today, then maybe your strategy has to be who hates them or who is in competition with them. So every recruiter in the world now who you're trying to displace may actually need you more than they ever needed you, and that you may be the solution to their innovator's dilemma. Maybe you should partner with them, and maybe you should take a piece of every instead of trying to take the piece. That's strategy and business model. My strategy is I want to go after that market, recruiting in for AI resources, which is up 400%. But my business model is I'm going to use a white label partnership model. That's the way I'm going to make money. So I'm going to give someone who's in trouble an opportunity to actually compete against who they hate, which is this new company. So that business model is the key. I would also say people like to say, well, I'm a tech company. I don't think there is a such thing as a tech company. I think that there's tech enabled business models.
Solutions.
And if you have some tech that can make that business model work better than a business model would work for someone else without technology, yes, it's a tech enabled business model. But very few technologies just go to market. People need to figure out what the model is that is valuable to get it to market. And in the end, of course, we know that if you don't execute, no one ever wins without getting boots on the ground, right? You got to have things on the ground. But when your boots are misaligned because you're in brainstorming, not and you don't have a good strategy and your business model, you can keep doing it over and over again and you're not making any progress, then those execution resources are sub-optimized and ultimately you won't have enough money to support them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great point. I love that the point that you made about strategy is about saying no. And when you think about some of the big corporate turnarounds, like Apple comes to mind, for example, that what did Steve Jobs do when he went back to turn the company around? He slashed the majority of the R&D that they had on different products that were not really as core to the business, and looked at really doubled down on what can be successful, which really seems like in these times, if we're looking at uncertainty, sometimes spreading yourself too thin just because maybe you've got, one customer over here who might want something, but is that core to what the competencies of the business are, that really
Or the constraints that you have because
constraints.
of
Yeah.
money or anything else. I mean, it's the hardest thing to do is to give up, something that you can see could be useful. But if I don't live long enough, it won't matter, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, given kind of where we are right now and leading through these times of uncertainty, you talked about a few things that I think there's parallels to the military, and there's, just from your business experience in terms of, focus and, being careful about taking funding. But I mean, how do you, as a leader today in an environment where, you have a number of people in your team who are looking up to you and they're sort of expecting a direction. What are some of the key tenets of strong leadership in this environment?
Well, I think there's, the first, the do no evil is you have to make sure that you don't run out of money, right? That's the way you die. When you buy real estate, you'll make money in real estate most of the time if you don't get default on your debt. So the first thing is understand how you're going to fund yourself, right? The second thing is understand that if you don't know the answer, you still have to get alignment, which means that the leader has to be sure and steady with what he does know or she does know, and sure and steady with what they don't know and what they need help with. Right. And so everyone thinks that, it is lonely and you don't want to tell people things that will scare them. But most of the time, people know. People know when there's trouble, or they know that they don't know what the trouble is, but they know they are in trouble. So, some ways, dissipating that angst, getting the monster out of the closet and into the room, allows you a chance to get help with deciding, is it really a monster? Isn't it a monster? And if it is, how is it going to attack me? Right. So, talking about things, right? Keeping your feet moving, keeping people feel like they have some internal level of control. These are not big business strategies. These are very focused human strategies. When you take a look at how the human animal is designed, and this goes a little bit into my stuff I do today around longevity in medicine. Um, we have some huge benefits in as a mammal, and one of the biggest is the way our parasympathetic nervous system works, and it allows us to connect with bigger tribes than just the people that we see every day. It allows us to activate, our brain and our body, but it also um, can be overwhelmed. And when people are fearful, they do not make good decisions and their body breaks down. So I can't solve every problem, but if I don't allow people to talk about their problems and to talk about them in a positive way, then it's going to come back to hurt me. And so I do think now, again, I'm biased. There's different types of leadership. I think that there's some leaders who are like, if I can dissipate fear by being very clear about what I want you to do and how I'm going to measure you. And I don't have to be personal about it at all. There are other leaders who want to actually spend a lot of time together, and they want to work through the same thing. So let's work on what we have to do and how we're going to do it, but let's do it in a much more interactive way. There is no one great leadership style. There is a great leadership style for the person and that person applying it in that time. Right now, some of that's a little bit of luck. Are you the right person at the right time who has the capability to do it? That means that you have to understand yourself well enough. Right. And I think that's one of the things when I talk about the entrepreneur's, survival guide. There's two things that really drive survival. And the first is self awareness. And the second is the ability to make decisions under pressure. Right. And the self awareness thing, I think, is the most important because if you aren't aware of who you are and how you think and what your weaknesses are, the decisions that you have to make will be not only tougher, but they'll be suboptimal. Right. And I had to, at when my last company, when I stepped away, I recruited my replacement because I thought at the end of the day, I've gotten a product out, I build out worldwide manufacturing, but we're going to go into a lull and we're going to have to cut back on resources. And shouldn't we have a leader that is engineering focused? Because that has been a CTO and and been an engineer and a programmer. Because as you constrict, you're going to focus and you're going to focus on product and you're going to focus on engineering. Very, very difficult for me. I don't like to believe that I can't help, right? But sometimes helping is getting out of the way.
Yeah. And and you talk about self-awareness. That's a big recognition. And I know that you run a CEO mastermind group. So I'm curious about what some of the key issues or the key lessons that you're hearing from global CEOs right now in that group.
Sure. Well, I can tell you, I have 50 CEOs, say, in 40 different industries. So we're a very different group. We try. My belief is that it's about funnel vision versus tunnel vision. That it's not about knowing everything about the industry and best practices. During times of ambiguity, best practices are the easiest way to die slowly, right? Because everyone's doing the same things. You have to be able to see, when your constraints are around those best practices and when you have to innovate, and you have to innovate earlier than everybody else. But so I can tell you there's, I think, 5 reasons that people come to the group, and then I'll go back and tell you what I think I've learned from that. These are all people 5 million to 10 million at the low end of revenue, all of them profitable. Even the 5 to 10 million people are their owner operators. They probably own 90% of their company. Um, and they still make $2 or $3 million, and at the top end $1 billion, and they could make 30, 50, 70 million dollars a year, right? So all of them have been successful, and they have some level of control because they're owners. There are a couple that have VC money in them, but most of them, they were bootstrapped and they just happen to be winners in their area. And here's the things that they are struggling with. Okay, how do I bring in more sales? How do I bring in more revenue? How do I double the size of my business? I've been doing this for a long time, and I just want to hear some ideas outside the box. I think I know my industry, but I can't figure this out. I can grow 10% or 15%, but I hear these people who reinvent themselves, and I need help with that. The second is, um, I'm an operator owner, and I want to be an owner operator. I've been working 7 days a week for 10, 15 years. I want someone to run the business, and I want to be involved in it, but I need to step back. I want to be the owner, not the operator, right? The third is, at some point, my kids need to take this over. I need to sell this thing. I don't even know what a turn is. What do you mean earnings turns? What's EBITDA, right? How do I position my business to be more valuable so a year from now or 2 years from now, either I can transition it to my kids and they can take some investment, or I can sell the business, right? Then you actually make a turn. Now all of those make sense. They're all about performance, right? Then it turns out that when I start doing the surveys, then there's health. I've been killing myself. I've been sacrificing. I've been rewarded for it. But if I die, it won't matter. Okay. So most of them are under tremendous stress. The coping mechanisms that they have are not around self-care. They're around performance so that they feel better about things. And so they're trying to figure out, what can I do if I had to invest in myself? What should I do? Should I get a concierge doctor? Are there ways to be just as effective, but to actually do things that are healthier for me? Now, what they'd all love to find a drug that just says, oh, just take this and it will be fine. Right. So that's the fourth one. Then becomes relationship. It turns out that it's very lonely, no matter where you are. The number one cause of mental illness under 25 is loneliness. The number one cause of death over 65 is loneliness. The number one cause of dysfunction emotionally is loneliness. Okay. And so they're finding that I don't know how to actually make friends. The average man in America who runs a company has less than one best friend when you look at all the surveys, right? The average woman who's not running a company has an average of 5 best friends. Now, they're very different on how they define those, right? It was an open-ended box for most of the surveys. Men tend to name the person they've known the longest, even if they don't talk to them very often, and even if they don't talk about anything really personal. They say, my best friend is X. Women tend to rotate best friends, and it all how often do they talk to them, and what do they talk to them about? Now, what's interesting is when you put a woman into running a company, she ends up looking a lot more like the man, that she may have 1.5 friends, because the environment itself is not conducive to actually being able to invest in relationship and friendship. Now, where can you bridge that gap? In mentors, because they're business friends, but they know a lot more about you, and they have permission to talk about you personally, right? And you don't have to put up a front, because in business, No one wants to say I cried yesterday, although I did, right? No one wants to say that because in the back of someone's head, they're going to say, they may be ready to break. I'm not sure I want to bet on that. I don't know if I want to join that company. So this fifth category is all about how do I manage relationship? And one of the big tools that I'm sure someone else has done it, but that I developed was this thing called relativity rules. It's kind of a fun pun, right? It's all about relativity, but there's a bunch of rules to it. And if you do an audit, if you're running a business and you do an audit and you actually look at where you spend your time, you will come to the conclusion that you're spending 30 to 40% of your time with people you hate or people you don't want to spend time with. Okay. Either because they bring you negative energy or because they're, not bringing you any positive energy. And that you don't really, it's not making you feel better as a person. But why do you spend time with those people? One is it's part of doing business, but you could probably spend less time if you just realize what you need to get done and you're more disciplined about it. The second group of people that fall in that category are people who want something from you. You're relative to them, they're not relative to you. And so they suck up to you, they call you, they keep asking for things, and you're just like, okay. And maybe at some point you feel like that makes me a good person. Maybe at some point you say, I got to get them off my back. I'll play golf with them and they want to get a deal from me. But people will take from you what you don't want to give them if you're not strong enough to decide. And that could be your sister-in-law. You may still have to see her at dinner. It doesn't mean you have to spend time talking to her. It means you can be really nice to her. But if she's going to come up to you and start complaining and it's going to suck the lifeblood out of your holiday, then find a way to give her a great gift and smile and hug her and then say, and then find the mechanisms that you need to do to get out of that. And the same goes for business relationships. There's people you have to do business with, but you may find that you're going to hire a chief of staff and they're going to spend time with them because, that's their job as a younger person. And then the final thing that, people look at, after relationship is they're just trying to figure out how to be inspired. And I think that's what helps with having people in different industries because it becomes clear to people that every business, every sport is just about people and patterns. And so all you're doing is figuring out how I best can manage people, and what patterns am I seeing and how am I reacting to them. And the sooner I can see them, the sooner I can make a decision on them. Like classic example cliche is never fired anyone sooner than you knew that they should be fired. Over and over, I get people to stand up in the group and talk about this, whether they whine about it or whether they yell about it or whether they just are humiliated. I will go through an exercise and they'll say, I knew it, but I thought, it's going to destabilize the company if I take him out. Or he's been here for 22 years, right? Or, there's always, yeah, it's not doing that bad a job. But what you find is when you don't take action as a leader for bad resources, everybody else comes down and there's a distrust to you. They're trying to figure out why aren't you firing that person? Are they paying you off? Are they sucking up to you? Are you sleeping with them? There's a reason because everyone else is looking around and saying, why? That doesn't make any sense. And by the way, it's making my life worse. And as a leader, you can make that decision, right? Especially if you own your own business, that you're going to give up, for ease of use, you're going to give up making a hard decision, and you're going to reduce performance. But very few sportsmen or sportswomen like to lose. You wouldn't be in it if you like to lose. So, it's better to pay someone off.
Yeah. And it's what's really interesting is when you do delay that decision, when you eventually make it, now suddenly, you find all these stories coming up in the company about, other issues that you didn't even see with
It's
that person.
shocking.
Now
It's
it's like everyone's
consistent.
like, oh well, thank God. And you
Right,
thought that
but
would
it's
stop the whole
what you
company.
just said. We all know, but for some reason, we don't think about it when we're under that pressure,
Yeah.
because it's like this was last month. It turns out the guy was terrible, but he was also stealing, right? And he embezzled $1 million. And I'm like, you've known he was, not a good person for a long time. He goes, yeah, but I didn't want to worry about that. I wanted to worry about sales. And he was doing, in the back shop. And It never fails. Very, very, very rarely. I'm not going to say, I shouldn't say never. Very rarely will you find that when you pull someone out, there was 100 more stories and that everyone actually says they brought me down to, right? It's just the way it is. So one of the things I did, which I did it because I wanted to be a good person. So you have to be selfish, right? And I'm not sure that made me a good person, but it definitely made me more effective. Was when I fired someone directly, or we fired together, so a direct report. I said I will offer them a lunch, and I will spend an hour, and that sucks because you don't have enough time. I'll spend an hour, and I will talk to them about why we made this decision to do this, and I will ask them, and I'll tell them what I think about them and where they should go, and if I think there's some place that I can make them an introduction, I will. Now, okay, that sounds like, oh, well, what a great guy. 30% of the time they come in and they're like, I just want to tell you how much I hate this company and I hate you and I hate them. And let me tell you all the bad things that you do. But turns out sometimes even someone ranting will teach you something you never thought about, whether it's perception or it's reality. Another 30% of the people will come in and they'll say, wow, I need to actually think about this. I hadn't thought about it that way. That this really my personality? Do I really want to do this? You're telling me you don't seem to think that this is my aptitude, that I have aptitude in other places, but I'm not doing it because I was afraid of losing my job. And then a third of the people will look at you and said, "Oh my God, thank you." And what has happened, and just to give people a plus is, I'm old now, right? So over 35 years of doing this, right? People will come back to me. One of the best sources of people to come work when I'm recruiting, they're referred by people we've let go because they'll say to them, I trust this person. They will tell you the truth and this is a good person to work for. Or deals. They'll bring a deal and say, hey, because and this is an admission that he will know who he is. I fired my best friend, and he
That's
was really mad because he said, "Dude, just give me another year. I just need a transition path." And I said, You've had a year, and you're going to be dead. You're going to lose all your confidence. I can already see it because no one who's a player and wants to play can actually fail because they know it subconsciously and they start to deteriorate. They lose their self confidence. He went on to find a job that was better for him and became more successful than me. But he found the right job. And so he always thanks me. He said, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have done it. But, sometimes, you need someone to push you and say, I'm afraid.
Yep. No, I think that's great advice. This has been really fascinating, Blair, and I think I'd be remiss if I closed out this episode before asking you about your astronaut training. So tell us, what's it like?
Yeah, I would tell you that it's been more the ability to get us where we are today. We started 17 years ago, and we were going to be up in 3 years. And this is one of those long-term things where you say, no, 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 we won the X Prize, and we're going to be in space with commercial space. And it took much, much longer and cost much, much more than anyone ever thought. But what I've learned from that is that I have made some of the best friendships in my life through the experience of not giving up.
Mm.
And we haven't given up. And when Richard got up and did the first commercial space flight, of course we celebrated that because that was, it changed the world, right? But the time that we've all spent together, because I was an investor and an early person who helped out with the company, I had a chance before we decided to change ships. We decided um, it happened to be ironically right around the same time that the Titan sub imploded. Um, we decided that we were going to actually make the switch from handmade ships to going out to commercial made ships, so that we had to take a pause to outsource to Northrop and Boeing and a lot of the guys who make commercial ships. And I had a chance to go just before then, and one of my good friends who his lifelong dream was to teach about space, and he jumped in and went up, and so I put myself off a couple of years. We're just coming back online again, and the training we've done, most of it is mental, right?
Mm.
Because what we're doing, there's not a, we're crew members and we do some things when we're up there, but we've made it so that as long as you don't freak out, you will actually be fine. But the problem is when your adrenaline starts going and it's the first time you've been on zero G, unlike the Bezos ship, which is another design, it goes up and it comes down like a I wouldn't say a carnival ride, but like a carnival ride. It just goes up and down. We take off and we fly around and then we hit the accelerator. We go into space. We do a couple turns and then we come back down. Um, you have to train mentally not to be afraid and to be conscious and be in the moment. And we also spend a lot of time thinking about a thing called the Overwatch effect, which almost every astronaut that's come back, has said it changed the way I look at the world. It connected me. It's almost like I can imagine having never done it. Maybe it's like having a magic mushroom trip where when you separate from the magnetic field and you can see the whole Earth, it actually makes you see everything at the same time. And you come back thinking, wow, how fragile the world is and how connected we are to the world. And so a lot of the things we do is we put together plans on what we're going to do. Now, my friend Ron is actually out teaching. He teaches every week to elementary school kids about, what it's like to be a steward of the earth, right? So most of the training, yes, we do when we're up, we come in the week before and we go back up and do zero tree training and some of the smaller jets and we practice getting in and out of our seats. But most of it really is mental. How do we enjoy the ride?
What an amazing experience. And how do we enjoy the ride? I love that. I think there's so many parallels and lessons for not only for business, but for life. So kudos to you for doing that. I think that's wonderful. So Blair, I know that, you speak, you consult, you have this mastermind group. How can people reach out to you if they're interested in connecting?
Sure. Look, if there's something easy that I can help you with, go up to my LinkedIn. And also, we put a lot of videos up there and connections to some of the mastermind group we do. We're a little bit different in the sense that, we'll share anything that we have. Because I think, for the people who join and come to it, there is a huge advantage to being there in person, but that doesn't mean there is an advantage in listening to some of the content we go through. And the second is we have a website called PPE Mastermind that you can go to directly and you can see kind of some of the things we do and where we're going to be. And if you're interested in and coming to a session, you're always welcome. We'll, where we fluctuate between 40 and 60 people. It's just not a big group, but for you will know immediately. I think is the answer. If we're for you, you know it, and if we're not for you, hopefully you'll still build a relationship or some relationships because it really is all about how to connect.
Absolutely. Well, and we'll put all those links in the show notes. So, Blair, thanks again for being on the podcast. I've truly enjoyed our conversation.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you inviting me.